Sarah Martinez adjusted her designer handbag as she walked across the bustling campus of Northwestern University. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her expensive heels, and she couldn't help but feel satisfied with how perfectly her life was falling into place. As the daughter of a prominent real estate mogul, she had never known financial struggle, and her social status among the elite students was unquestionable. The campus coffee shop buzzed with afternoon energy as students hurried between classes. Sarah spotted her usual table near the window, where her friends Jessica Chen and Amanda Thompson were already seated, their matching designer notebooks spread across the polished surface. "Sarah, you won't believe what happened in Professor Williams' class today," Jessica said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of gossip. "That scholarship kid, what's his name? David something actually challenged the professor's economic theory." Sarah raised an eyebrow as she settled into her chair, smoothing her perfectly pressed skirt. "David Richardson? The one who always sits in the front row taking those frantic notes?" "That's him," Amanda chimed in, twirling her platinum blonde hair around her finger. "He's so intense about everything. I heard he works 3 jobs just to afford his textbooks." The conversation was interrupted when a shadow fell across their table. Sarah looked up to see David Richardson himself standing there, his dark hair slightly disheveled from rushing between classes. His clothes were clean but clearly worn, and she noticed how he clutched a manila folder against his chest like it contained something precious. "Excuse me, Sarah," David said, his voice carrying a slight nervous tremor. "I was wondering if I could talk to you for a minute." Jessica and Amanda exchanged meaningful glances, barely concealing their smirks. Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her as other students at nearby tables began to notice the interaction. "I'm kinda busy right now," Sarah replied coolly, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Maybe later." David shifted uncomfortably, but his determination seemed to strengthen. "It'll just take a second. I wanted to ask if you'd like to go to the campus art exhibition with me this Friday. I know you're studying art history, and I thought you might enjoy it." The silence that followed felt deafening. Sarah could feel the eyes of her friends and other nearby students watching the scene unfold. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. How dare he put her in such an awkward position in front of everyone? "Listen, David," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the coffee shop. "I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think we have much in common. You should probably ask someone more suited to your situation." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. David's face went pale, and Sarah saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Hurt, disappointment, and something else she couldn't quite identify. It looked almost like determination mixed with a quiet fury. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious pain. "Thank you for being honest." As David turned and walked away, Sarah tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling settling in her stomach. Jessica and Amanda immediately began chattering about the encounter, but their words seemed distant and muffled. "Can you believe his nerve?" Jessica was saying. "Acting like he actually had a chance with you." "Seriously," Amanda agreed. "He should stick to his own kind. Those scholarship kids need to learn their place." Sarah found herself watching David's retreating figure as he navigated through the crowded coffee shop. There was something about the way he held his shoulders, straight and proud despite what had just happened, that made her feel strangely unsettled. Over the following weeks, Sarah noticed David around campus but made a point of avoiding any direct interaction. She heard through the gossip network that he had dropped out suddenly, citing family obligations. Some people said his father had fallen ill, while others claimed he simply couldn't keep up with the academic and financial pressures. "Good riddance," Jessica had commented when the news reached their social circle. "Now maybe Professor Williams' classes won't be so awkward with all his desperate questions." But Sarah found herself wondering what had really happened to David Richardson. During late-night study sessions in the library, she would sometimes find herself looking toward the front desk where he used to work the evening shift. earning money to pay for his education. The space seemed oddly empty without his quiet, focused presence. Months passed, and Sarah threw herself into her social life with renewed vigor. She dated the captain of the lacrosse team, attended exclusive parties at the most prestigious fraternity houses, and maintained her position at the top of the social hierarchy. Her grades remained excellent. Her future seemed bright, and she convinced herself that the awkward encounter with David Richardson had been completely forgotten. During spring break, Sarah traveled to Europe with her parents, posting carefully curated photos of herself in front of famous landmarks. The trip was everything she had dreamed of: luxury hotels, designer shopping, and romantic dinners at restaurants where meals cost more than most people's weekly salaries. But occasionally, usually when she was alone in her hotel room at night, she would find herself thinking about David's expression that day in the coffee shop, the way his eyes had darkened when she delivered her crushing rejection. There had been something almost otherworldly about that look, something that had haunted her more than she cared to admit. By the time she returned to Northwestern for her senior year, David Richardson had become nothing more than a distant memory, a minor footnote in her college experience. Sarah focused on her thesis, her internship applications, and her relationship with Trevor Hamilton, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune who seemed like the perfect match for her future plans. The art history department was abuzz with excitement about a guest lecture series featuring successful alumni who had made names for themselves in various creative industries. Sarah eagerly signed up for the presentations, hoping to make networking connections that might help launch her career in museum curation. "The speaker list is incredible," Professor Martinez told her students during their contemporary art seminar. "We have gallery owners from New York, museum directors from Chicago, and even a representative from one of the most exclusive private art consulting firms in the country." Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to impress influential people in her chosen field and potentially secure a position at a prestigious institution after graduation. The first lecture was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the university's largest auditorium. Sarah arrived early, dressed in her most professional outfit, a tailored black dress that struck the perfect balance between sophisticated and approachable. She had spent extra time on her hair and makeup, wanting to make the best possible first impression. As students filled the auditorium, Sarah noticed an air of unusual excitement and anticipation. People were whispering among themselves, and she caught fragments of conversation about the mysterious nature of the evening's speaker. "I heard he's incredibly young to be running such a successful company," one student was saying. "My cousin in New York said his firm represents some of the most exclusive collectors in the world," another added. "Apparently they deal with pieces worth millions of dollars." Professor Martinez took the stage and called for attention. "Tonight, we're honored to have with us David Richardson, founder and CEO of Richardson Acquisitions, one of the most prestigious art consulting firms in North America. Mr. Richardson graduated from Northwestern just 3 years ago and has since built an empire in the world of high-end art collection and curation." Sarah's blood ran cold. The name hit her like a physical blow, and she felt her carefully applied makeup suddenly feel heavy and artificial on her face. It couldn't be the same David Richardson. It had to be a coincidence. The David she remembered had been a struggling scholarship student who worked multiple jobs just to afford his textbooks. But as the auditorium lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the podium, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. The man who walked onto the stage was indeed David Richardson, but he was transformed beyond recognition. Gone was the nervous, poorly dressed boy she remembered. In his place stood a figure of undeniable power and elegance. David moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. His dark hair was perfectly styled, framing a face that had somehow become more angular and striking than she remembered. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that fit him like it had been crafted specifically for his tall, lean frame. But it was his eyes that truly shocked her. They seemed to glow with an inner light, and when his gaze swept across the auditorium, Sarah felt as though he could see directly into her soul. "Good evening," David said, his voice carrying easily through the large space without the need for amplification. "3 years ago, I sat in these very seats, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly out of reach. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the power of transformation, both in art and in life." Sarah sank lower in her seat, hoping desperately that he wouldn't notice her among the hundreds of students in attendance. But as David continued his presentation, discussing rare paintings and exclusive collections with an expertise that left the audience captivated, she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes kept finding her in the crowd. The lecture was brilliant and engaging, filled with stories of discovering lost masterpieces and facilitating acquisitions for collectors whose names were whispered in the most exclusive circles of the art world. David spoke with confidence and authority, commanding the attention of every person in the room. When he smiled, which he did frequently during his presentation, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. His canine teeth seemed unusually sharp and white. As the evening concluded and students began filing out of the auditorium, Sarah tried to blend in with the crowd and make a quick exit. But her plans were thwarted when Professor Martinez called out to her from the stage area. "Sarah, could you come here for a moment?
I'd like you to meet Mr. Richardson."
Given your exceptional work in contemporary art analysis, I thought you two might have a lot to discuss." With her heart pounding and her palms sweating, Sarah had no choice but to make her way toward the stage. Each step felt like she was walking toward her doom, and she could feel David's intense gaze following her movement through the thinning crowd. When she finally reached the stage area, Professor Martinez was beaming with pride. "Mr. Richardson, I'd like you to meet Sarah Martinez, one of our most promising students. She's been working on a fascinating thesis about the psychological impact of art ownership among elite collectors." David extended his hand towards Sarah, and when she reluctantly took it, she was shocked by how cold his skin felt. His grip was firm but gentle, and he held her hand just a fraction of a second longer than was strictly professional. "Sarah Martinez," he said, his voice carrying undertones that only she could detect. "What an unexpected pleasure to meet you again." The emphasis on the word "again" sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Professor Martinez looked between them with curiosity, clearly sensing some kind of connection but unable to place it. "Have you two met before?" the professor asked. David's smile was perfectly polite, but Sarah could see something darker lurking behind his eyes. "We were acquainted during my time as a student here, though I suspect Sarah might not remember our interaction as clearly as I do." Sarah felt trapped, standing there between her professor and this transformed version of the boy she had once so cruelly rejected. Every instinct told her to run, but social convention and professional courtesy kept her rooted in place. Yes, I think I remember," she managed to say, her voice sounding weak and uncertain even to her own ears. "Wonderful!" Professor Martinez exclaimed. "Then you'll be perfect for what I'm about to propose. Mr. Richardson's firm is looking for a new junior curator, someone fresh out of university with excellent academic credentials and a keen eye for emerging talent. Sarah, I can't think of anyone better suited for such an opportunity." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. The same boy she had rejected for not being suited to her situation was now in a position to offer her exactly the kind of career opportunity she had been dreaming about. David's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Sarah could see the hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. "What an intriguing possibility," he said smoothly. "I would certainly be interested in reviewing Sarah's qualifications and perhaps conducting a formal interview." "That's fantastic," Professor Martinez said, completely oblivious to the undercurrents of tension between his star student and the successful alumnus. "Sarah, this could be exactly the break you've been looking for." As Sarah stood there, trapped between her past cruelty and her future ambitions, she realized that David Richardson held all the cards. The struggling scholarship student she had dismissed so callously now, and something about the way he was looking at her, with those strangely luminous eyes and that too sharp smile, made her suspect that this reunion was no mere coincidence. The boy she had rejected had returned, transformed into something powerful and potentially dangerous, and Sarah had the sinking feeling that her night of reckoning was only just beginning. 3 days after the lecture, Sarah received an elegant email invitation to interview for the junior curator position at Richardson Acquisitions. The message was professionally worded and included details about the firm's prestigious client list and the scope of responsibilities for the role. But what made Sarah's hands tremble as she read it was the personal postscript at the bottom. I look forward to our conversation about your qualifications and how much you've grown since our last interaction. Dr. The interview was scheduled for the following Friday at the firm's Chicago headquarters. Sarah spent the entire week researching everything she could find about Richardson Acquisitions, trying to understand how David had managed such a dramatic transformation in just 3 years. The company's website was sleek and professional, featuring images of priceless artworks and testimonials from satisfied clients whose names read like a who's who of international high society. What troubled Sarah most was how little information she could find about David's background or the early days of his company. The official biography simply stated that he had graduated from Northwestern with honors and immediately founded Richardson Acquisitions with the backing of several anonymous private investors. There were no interviews, no feature articles about his rise to success, and no photographs of him from before the company's establishment. On the morning of the interview, Sarah stood in front of her full-length mirror, adjusting her navy blue blazer for the 10th time. She had chosen her outfit carefully, professional enough to show respect for the opportunity, but not so formal as to seem desperate. Her reflection looked confident and polished, but she couldn't shake the nervous energy that had been building all week. The Richardson Acquisitions building was located in one of Chicago's most exclusive business districts, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that reached toward the cloudy sky like a modern cathedral. As Sarah approached the entrance, she noticed how the building seemed to cast unusual shadows, even on the overcast day. The lobby was decorated with carefully curated pieces of contemporary art, each one clearly worth more than most people's annual salaries. The receptionist, a striking woman named Victoria Chen, with platinum blonde hair and pale blue eyes, greeted Sarah with a smile that seemed almost too perfect. "Miss Martinez, Mr. Richardson is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the penthouse floor." As the elevator climbed silently through the floors, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. She reminded herself that she was qualified for this position, that her academic record spoke for itself, and that she deserved this opportunity regardless of her history with David. But deep down, she couldn't escape the feeling that this interview was about much more than her professional qualifications. The penthouse floor was even more impressive than the lobby. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline, while the walls displayed an eclectic collection of artwork spanning several centuries. Sarah recognized pieces that she had only seen in art history textbooks, originals that belonged in major museums rather than private offices. "Impressive, isn't it?" David's voice came from behind her, causing Sarah to jump slightly. She turned to find him standing in the doorway of what appeared to be his private office, looking even more commanding than he had during the lecture. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a deep red tie, and his dark hair caught the light streaming through the windows in a way that made it seem almost luminous. "It's incredible," Sarah said honestly, gesturing toward a small Picasso sketch that hung near the conference area. "Some of these pieces are museum quality." "All of them are museum quality," David replied, moving closer with that same fluid grace she had noticed during his lecture. "But my clients prefer the exclusivity of private ownership. There's something about possessing beauty that others can only dream of seeing that appeals to a certain type of collector." The way he said the word possessing made Sarah's skin crawl, though she couldn't quite explain why. David gestured toward a seating area near the windows, where 2 leather chairs faced each other across a low table set with crystal glasses and an expensive bottle of wine. "Please, I thought we might conduct this interview in a more relaxed setting than the traditional conference room." Sarah settled into one of the chairs, noting how soft the leather felt and how the chair seemed to envelop her in unexpected comfort. David poured wine into both glasses, the deep red liquid catching the light like liquid rubies. "I don't usually drink during business meetings," Sarah said cautiously. "This isn't just business," David replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "This is a reunion between old friends. Besides, this particular vintage is quite rare. It would be a shame to let the opportunity pass." Against her better judgment, Sarah accepted the glass and took a small sip. The wine was unlike anything she had ever tasted, rich and complex, with an almost metallic aftertaste that lingered on her tongue. David watched her reaction with obvious satisfaction. "Now then," he said, settling into the chair across from her and crossing one leg over the other in a pose of casual elegance. "Let's talk about your qualifications for this position. Your academic record is impressive, your thesis shows real insight into the psychology of art collecting, and Professor Martinez speaks very highly of your potential." Sarah began to relax slightly as the interview moved into familiar territory. She spoke eloquently about her studies, her passion for art history, and her career goals. David listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his own deep knowledge of the field. But as the conversation continued, Sarah began to notice things that made her increasingly uncomfortable. David never seemed to blink. His pale skin looked almost translucent in the afternoon light, and when he smiled, those unnaturally sharp canine teeth were clearly visible. Most disturbing of all, she couldn't see his reflection in the polished surface of the conference table between them. "You know," David said suddenly, interrupting her description of her thesis research, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation in the campus coffee shop." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Of course you do," he said softly, leaning forward slightly. "You told me that we didn't have much in common, that I should find someone more suited to my situation. Do you remember that?" The words hung between them like an accusation. David did begin to crumble because they descended all the way. Trust. Where did David send it as pie? David, to descended, said to the trust. "We were both different people then, were we?" he asked, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality that seemed to reverberate through her entire body. "I've certainly changed, that's true. But what about you, Sarah? Are you still the same person who judged others based on their financial status, who believed that social hierarchy determined a person's worth?" Sarah wanted to protest, to defend herself, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. The wine she had consumed was making her feel strangely lightheaded, and David's eyes seemed to be growing brighter and more compelling with each passing moment. "I can offer you everything you've ever dreamed of," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "A prestigious position, access to the most exclusive circles of the art world, financial security beyond anything you could achieve on your own. All I ask in return is your complete dedication and loyalty." "What kind of loyalty?" Sarah managed to ask, though her voice sounded distant and unfamiliar to her own ears. David's smile widened, revealing those sharp teeth in their full, terrifying glory. "The kind that lasts forever. The kind that binds you to me in ways you can't yet imagine. You see, Sarah, my transformation over the past 3 years hasn't just been professional. I've gained access to power and influence that goes far beyond the ordinary business world." As he spoke, the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to dim, though Sarah couldn't see any clouds passing over the sun. The shadows in the office grew longer and darker, and she began to feel as though the very air around her was growing thick and oppressive. "I don't understand," she whispered, though part of her was beginning to suspect the truth. "Don't you?" David asked, rising from his chair with inhuman grace. "Haven't you noticed the signs? The way I move, the way I speak, the way light seems to bend around me? The fact that you can't see my reflection in that table between us." Sarah's eyes darted to the polished surface, confirming what she had been trying to ignore. Where David's reflection should have been, there was only empty space. Terror began to flood through her system, but she found herself unable to move, as if some invisible force was holding her in place. "You're," she began, but couldn't bring herself to say the word. "A vampire," David finished for her, his voice carrying a note of dark amusement. "Transformed 3 years ago by someone who saw potential in me that others had overlooked, someone who understood what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated by those who considered themselves superior." The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's terrified mind. David's sudden disappearance from university, his mysterious financial backing, the way he seemed to command supernatural authority and influence. The boy she had rejected had indeed transformed, but into something far more dangerous than a successful businessman. "The night you rejected me in that coffee shop, you awakened something in me," David continued, beginning to pace around her chair like a predator circling its prey. "Not just hurt or anger, but a hunger for power and revenge that consumed everything else. When my sire found me, broken and desperate, he offered me the chance to become everything I had dreamed of and more." Sarah tried to stand, but found her legs wouldn't obey her commands. The wine, she realized with growing horror, had been drugged or enchanted in some way. She was completely at David's mercy, trapped in his web of supernatural power and long-nursed vengeance. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. David stopped pacing and knelt beside her chair, bringing his face close to hers. His breath was cold against her skin, and she could see her own terrified reflection in his dark eyes. "I want you to understand what it feels like to have your entire future dependent on someone else's whim," he said softly. "I want you to experience the vulnerability and desperation that I felt that day. And then, if you prove worthy, I want you to join me in this new existence. And if I refuse?" David's laugh was like ice crackling in winter air. "Oh, Sarah, you still don't understand, do you? This isn't a negotiation. This is a job interview, and I've already decided to hire you. The only question is whether you'll embrace your new position willingly, or whether I'll have to be more persuasive." As the sun continued to set outside the penthouse windows, casting the office into deeper shadow, Sarah realized that her old life was about to end. The boy she had cruelly rejected had returned as her employer, but he was offering her a position that would last for eternity. Whether she wanted it or not, the interview was far from over, and Sarah was beginning to understand that she might never leave this office as the same person who had entered it. David Richardson had spent 3 years planning his revenge, and now he was ready to collect what he believed she owed him. The only question remaining was what kind of creature she would become when the transformation was complete. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered with thousands of lights, a world of mortals going about their ordinary lives, completely unaware that in the penthouse office above them, one young woman's humanity was about to become the price of an old rejection's revenge. The hours that followed blurred together in Sarah's memory like a fever dream. David's supernatural influence over her mind made it impossible to think clearly or resist his commands. She found herself agreeing to return to the office the following evening for what he called orientation, though every instinct screamed at her to run as far away as possible. When Sarah finally returned to her apartment near campus, she collapsed onto her bed fully clothed, but sleep brought no peace. Her dreams were filled with images of David's glowing eyes, the sharp points of his teeth, and the cold touch of his skin against hers. She woke repeatedly throughout the night, checking her reflection in the mirror to make sure she was still entirely human. The next day passed in a haze of anxiety and dread. Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine, attending classes and meeting with friends, but everything felt surreal and distant. Jessica and Amanda noticed her distraction during lunch, commenting on her pale complexion and nervous behavior. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Amanda said, studying Sarah's face with concern. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah lied, pushing her salad around her plate without eating. "Just tired from the interview yesterday." "How did it go?" Jessica asked eagerly. "Did you get the position?" Sarah almost laughed at the irony of the question. She had indeed been offered a position, but not the kind her friends would ever understand or believe. "We're still discussing the details," she said evasively. As evening approached, Sarah felt an irresistible compulsion to return to the Richardson Acquisitions building. She tried to resist, even going so far as to drive in the opposite direction, but eventually found herself turning around and heading toward downtown Chicago. David's supernatural influence was too strong to fight, and she realized with growing horror that she was no longer fully in control of her own actions. The building's lobby was empty except for Victoria, the platinum-haired receptionist, who smiled at Sarah with what now seemed like predatory anticipation. "He's waiting for you," she said simply, gesturing toward the elevator. This time, the penthouse office had been transformed. The overhead lights were dimmed, replaced by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows across the walls. The artwork seemed to come alive in the flickering light, and Sarah noticed details she had missed during her first visit: subtle darkness in the paintings, hidden symbols, and artistic themes that suggested the supernatural. David stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the elevator as Sarah entered. The city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, but they seemed distant and unreachable from this height. "You came," he said without turning around, "though I suppose you didn't have much choice in the matter. What did you do to me?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I tried to stay away, but I couldn't." David finally turned to face her, and Sarah gasped at what she saw. His transformation was even more pronounced than it had been the previous day. His skin was nearly translucent, his eyes glowed with an inner fire, and when he smiled, his fangs were fully extended. He was no longer hiding what he had become. "I've marked you," he said simply. "It's a supernatural bond that allows me to influence your thoughts and actions. Think of it as a very binding employment contract." Sarah backed toward the elevator, but found the doors had closed behind her without her noticing. "This is insane. You can't just kidnap people and force them to work for you, can't I?" David asked, moving toward her with predatory grace. "You'd be surprised what I can do now. The transformation granted me abilities beyond anything I had imagined as a mortal. Strength, speed, mental influence, and, perhaps most importantly, the power to create others like myself." The implications of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You mean, yes?" he confirmed, circling around her like a hunter stalking prey. "I'm going to transform you, Sarah. Tonight, you'll die as the cruel, shallow girl who rejected me in that coffee shop. And tomorrow, you'll be reborn as something infinitely more powerful and beautiful." Sarah's mind raced, searching for any possible escape or negotiation. "David, please. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry, but this isn't the answer. You've built an incredible life for yourself. You don't need revenge." David laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the candlelit office. "This isn't just about revenge anymore, though that's certainly part of it. This is about justice, about giving you the opportunity to understand what real power feels like, about creating the perfect partner for eternity." "Partner?" Sarah whispered. "Did you think this was only about punishment?" David asked, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality that made her knees weak. "I've spent 3 years building an empire, accumulating wealth and influence beyond imagination. But what good is eternal existence without someone to share it with? Someone who understands the journey from mortality to something greater." He reached out and touched her face with fingers that felt like ice against her fevered skin. Despite her terror, Sarah found herself leaning into the touch, her body responding to his supernatural allure, even as her mind screamed warnings. "I could have chosen anyone," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "But I wanted you, the girl who thought she was too good for me. The one who represented everything I couldn't have as a mortal. Now you'll be mine forever, bound to me by blood and transformation." Sarah tried to pull away, but found her body wouldn't obey her commands. David's influence over her was growing stronger by the moment, making it increasingly difficult to think clearly or maintain her resistance. "The process is quite pleasant, actually," he said conversationally. as if discussing the weather rather than her impending transformation into the undead. There's a moment of pain when the change begins, but then ecstasy beyond anything you've ever experienced. You'll feel your human limitations falling away, replaced by strength and power you never dreamed possible. "My family," Sarah managed to say. "My friends, they'll know something's wrong." "Will they?" David asked, guiding her toward a luxurious leather couch that she hadn't noticed during her previous visit. Victoria was once a sorority girl from a wealthy family, much like yourself. Now look at her, successful, beautiful, and completely loyal to our cause. Your loved ones will simply see a young woman who has found her calling in the art world. As Sarah sank onto the couch, she noticed that Victoria had entered the office silently, carrying a silver tray with an ornate crystal goblet. The liquid inside was dark red and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "What is that?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "My blood, mixed with an ancient elixir that will ease your transformation," David explained, accepting the goblet from Victoria. "Drink this, and the change will begin. Refuse, and I'll simply take what I need by force. Either way, you're not leaving here as a mortal." Sarah looked between David's expectant face and Victoria's encouraging smile, realizing that she was truly trapped. There was no rescue coming, no last-minute escape plan that would save her from this fate. David had planned everything perfectly, and she was completely at his mercy. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I drink that and become like you, what happens then?" "Then you'll understand," David replied, his eyes glowing brighter with anticipation. "You'll see the world as it really is. You'll help me expand our influence, acquire new pieces for our collection, and build a network of supernatural power that spans the globe. And in your spare time, you'll be my companion, my equal, my eternal partner." The word equal struck Sarah as deeply ironic given that he was essentially forcing her into this transformation. But as she stared into the swirling depths of the goblet, she realized that her human life was over regardless of her choice. At least this way she might retain some agency in her new existence. "Will I still be me?" she asked quietly. David's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the vulnerable boy she had once known. "You'll be a better version of yourself. Stronger, smarter, more beautiful than you ever were as a mortal. The petty concerns and limitations that defined your human existence will fall away, replaced by clarity and purpose." Sarah reached for the goblet with shaking hands, feeling the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. As the crystal touched her lips, she caught David's eye one last time. "I hope you know what you're doing," she whispered. "Trust me," he replied, his voice filled with dark promise. "This is just the beginning." The liquid was warm against her tongue, with a taste that was simultaneously metallic and sweet. As it flowed down her throat, Sarah felt a tingling sensation that spread through her entire body. The candles in the room seemed to grow brighter, and she could hear sounds from the street far below with supernatural clarity. David knelt beside the couch, taking her hand in his cold grip. "How do you feel?" "Strange," Sarah managed to say, though her voice sounded different somehow, richer and more resonant. "Like I'm becoming someone else." "You are," he confirmed, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Welcome to your new life, Sarah. Welcome to eternity." As the transformation progressed and her human consciousness began to fade, Sarah's last coherent thought was a mixture of terror and anticipation. The boy she had rejected in a campus coffee shop had indeed become her employer, but their relationship was destined to be so much more complex and eternal than she could have ever imagined. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez was officially reported as a missing person by her frantic family. Security cameras showed her entering the Richardson Acquisitions building on a Friday evening, but there was no record of her leaving. The police investigation eventually went cold, and Sarah Martinez was presumed dead. But in the penthouse offices of the most exclusive art consulting firm in Chicago, A beautiful woman with pale skin and glowing eyes worked alongside her supernatural employer, helping to build an empire that spanned both the mortal and immortal worlds. She no longer remembered the pain of transformation, only the intoxicating power of her new existence, and the eternal bond she shared with the vampire who had once been a struggling college student she thought beneath her notice. The cruel irony of her fate was not lost on her in her clearer moments. She had rejected David Richardson for not being suited to her situation, only to discover that he was destined to determine her situation for all eternity. But as she stood beside him in their shared darkness, watching the city lights twinkle below like fallen stars, Sarah found herself strangely content with the bargain she had been forced to make. After all, she had wanted a prestigious position in the art world. She had simply never imagined that it would cost her her humanity, or that her employer would be the boy whose heart she had broken in a moment of thoughtless cruelty. But perhaps, she reflected as David's cold hand found hers in the candlelit darkness, this was exactly the kind of justice the universe had always intended. She turned down a struggling college kid, only to meet him again as her vampire employer.